So see, on this podcast, I would like to announce that जो भी मुझे 1 kg गोल्ड गिफ्ट करना चाहता है, मैं अभी भी ले लूंगा.
नहीं, किसी के पास
Okay,
आधा केजी है तो आधा केजी मेरे को दे दो यार.
आधा आधा 100 ग्राम भी ले लेंगे हम.
Everyone is expecting an income tax cut every single budget. I don't think that's going to be feasible for any country anywhere in the world. You cannot have an income tax cut every single year. That is just outlandish to expect. So this was supposed to be boring budget. What I really liked is that there is certain focus on rare earth magnets. There is focus on semiconductors. Now, in semiconductors, we get a lot of flack that we are not producing 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer semiconductors. So what's really the point? Look, the 2 nanometer, 3 nanometer, 5 nanometer category that is taken care by the TSMC, and America is also securing its interest right now on in that category because Apple needs a lot of it, and all the big industries need a lot of it. But the majority electronic appliances, they deal in the greater than 28 nanometer category, and that is where our focus is. If you talk about the electronics in your homes, your television, your car, your washing machine, things like that, they use semiconductors which are greater than nanometers, 28 nanometers. So I think the focus on semiconductor is good. Number three, you remember the kind of how people were losing their head during the Indigo crisis, and all the bad ideas came into the market that you should nationalize Indigo, you should get back Air India, the government should get back into the business of airlines and whatnot. I think the high-speed rail corridor has also been factored in given what happened with Indigo. Look, if an airline in India, and that too a private airline, has 70% market share, it's a very dangerous dependency to have. And we learned that the hard way a couple of months ago. Now, the good thing is we are looking at a high-speed rail corridor that will encompass parts of Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and the Chicken Neck, including West Bengal. But down south is where I'm excited about. You start at Maharashtra, you're going to Andhra Pradesh, you're going to Telangana, eventually to North Tamil Nadu. Then you have a part of Karnataka, and I'm pretty sure a Pune to Karnataka stretch will also be announced in a couple of years. It's just a matter of time, if you get what I mean. So we are looking at a zone, and these I always and we have spoken this offline also. It's Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. They will have always disproportionate attention when it comes to economic interest because the kind of economies these states have, they need all the infrastructure push. So, high-speed rail corridor, and I was quite excited that the railways minister said that we're looking at trains running at 320 kmph. That's seriously good because the Chinese, when they started the HSR around 2008, they were looking at 240 to 320. Now they are testing 600. But if we can really get this going, even by 2040, because land acquisition is going to be a nightmare. I think that's a huge, huge win. So I think that part was pretty good. The capex going in the right direction is pretty good. One other thing is a lot of people, often in the media industry, you'll find they'll say that you've been spending close to 100 lakh crore in the last 11 years on infrastructure. You've at least committed that amount. What's the point of it? Look, with respect to infrastructure, people need to understand a lot of it is playing the catch up game of the last 70 years. We did not build like we should have in the last 70 years. A lot of the infrastructure we're building right now is actually catch up infrastructure, not infrastructure we'll need for the future. So, probably now going forward across the early 2030s, until then, it will be all about creating infrastructure that can serve us for the next 100 years. So, capex shouldn't be seen with this notion that, oh, this is a waste of money and why do we need so many highways and airports? And there were journalists on television talking about this in this tone. So I just need to point that out. But overall, it was a boring budget, and it is supposed to be a boring budget because GST is taken out. So I really don't know when the mainstream media channels were running that ticker with what's costlier, what's pricier, what's cheaper. I really don't know what that means. But I think it's a futuristic looking budget. You're looking at biopharma, you understand that there is going to be a certain demand that will crop up in the next 20, 30 years, what kind of medicines that will be required, and you need to start manufacturing in India. But one thing I had take it as criticism or probably me being a little finicky. A lot of the pursuits that were announced in the budget, the state governments should actually be taking care of it. They're not doing their part really well. They need to up the ante. And it really means for every state government a lot of these things like municipal bonds, you look at some sort of centers for kids, institutes, things like that. These the state governments should be doing, the center shouldn't be doing. But it is what it is.
Okay, I had a question here. And this is something that has already been asked. हर्ष ये तेरी दुखती रगे और जिसमें मेरी और तेरी हमेशा डिसएग्रीमेंट होती है, फिस्कल डेफिसिट. ओके, बाय द वे आई एम स्टिल नॉट कन्विंस्ड. किसी ने लिखा था ये कि डिफेंस बजट अब मैं नाचूंगा, सारा केपेक्स रफाल में ना चले जाए बस. Harsh, please back me. Should we increase the deficit if we can increase defense budget even more? For full disclosure, I disagree. But bol Harsh.
No, see, I mean, it's very easy to understand if you do it more holistically. What is your fiscal deficit? Your fiscal deficit is your primary deficit plus interest payments. I think the primary deficit for budgeted FY27 is 0.8% of GDP, I think, right? And if your fiscal deficit is 4.3%, that means your interest payment is 3.5% of GDP. You are paying 3.5% of GDP on around 55-56% of debt to GDP for the union government level. So if you do the math, it's like, I don't know, exactly 7% ke aaspaas aata hai, right? 6.6, 6.7%. See, so you can actually keep the same fiscal deficit and increase the primary deficit if you have a lower cost of capital. So you can basically have a 1.2% primary deficit and continue to have a 4.3% fiscal deficit if your cost of capital is lower. In which case, Kushal is also happy and the person who asked that question is also happy. See, the point is, Tushar mentioned the Chinese build out of HSR, right? Ajay and I briefly mentioned defense. We are giving a lot of incentives, for example, on data centers, etc. And the reality is all of this costs money. What is also true is because there was a nominal GDP slowdown in year FY26, the year that's ending right now in March, there was a slowdown in revenue expenditure and there was a bit of a slowdown in capital expenditure, not much, a bit more in grants in aid to state on that account. Basically, that is how the circle was squared. Now, because your nominal GDP is right now growing at 8.5%, you had penciled in 10%. Also, this year the stock market was low, therefore your capital gains collection was lower, your STT was anyways a bit lower. For all of these reasons, we basically reduce the foot from the pedal of the accelerator in terms of both revenue expenditure as well as capex across the board. See, it's true that revenue expenditure is getting more efficient, and we must give full credit to the government for that. You have 800 million people getting food subsidies or support one way or the other, but they're all now Aadhaar seeded. So you don't have dead people getting subsidies, you don't have duplicates, etc., etc. And that has happened across all schemes. I mean, just a very quick detour, like 15 years ago when I briefly worked on the ground for NREJ, again, very classic. People were supposed to get 5,000 rupees for working for X number of days. They would go to the local post office guy where the money was dispersed for the 5,000. They'd have to pay 1,500 rupee bribe to get 3,500 rupees. And that, by the way, that even the digging was not done by them. The digging was done by a JCB in the night, right? Everything was fraudulent about that. So there's a lot of welfare programs which are now gotten much more efficient. So it's not just the amount of money. Nonetheless, in a slowdown, you had to slow down revenue expenditure and capex. क्या नहीं रोकते हो आप? सैलरी नहीं रोकते, सैलरी तो किसी की नहीं रोकोगे, प्लस पे कमीशन भी आ रहा है. आप इंटरेस्ट नहीं रोक सकते, आप बेसिक डिफेंस नहीं रोक सकते. सो बाकी जो भी डिस्क्रिशनरी टाइप का होता है उसको आप स्लो कर देते हो. So, ठीक है, we went on the glide path. Long story short, this is commendable, and I would agree with Kushal if this was also supported by the RBI. Now, you can say the RBI has supported it by cutting 125 basis points in the last 1 year or so. However, the fall in inflation has been more than by 125 basis points, including on core X gold basis. तो आपने नॉमिनल तो 125 से काट दिया, लेकिन आपका रियल तो भी थोड़ा ऊपर ही गया, नीचे नहीं आया. It's not like Mr. Malhotra is not trying, but there's a lot of confusion intellectually also at various levels. People say, well, the rupee is weak right now nominally. You can't cut interest rates. The problem is Indian flows, foreign inflows are more dependent on equity flows than bond flows. You have been in equity indices for 30 years. You've entered bond indices 2 years ago. There's hardly any money which is there in AUM terms compared to equity flows. So for a variety of reasons, just to put it all together, you can continue to have a sensible fiscal consolidation glide path if you also have a sensible real cost of capital. आप दोनों टाइट करोगे जो हमने किया था. See, unlike America where they act more like an emerging market, they open the spigots of spending before elections. we actually have something called a model code of conduct. तो 2024 में आपने फिजिकल स्पेंडिंग स्लो कर दी, ठीक है. वन ऑफ द एक्सपेंडिचर सेक्रेटरीज जो बाद में आए थे आफ्टर सोमनाथन, ही वाज आल्सो, देयर वर सम इश्यूज विदाउट गोइंग इनटू द डिटेल्स. एंड देन आपने साइमल्टेनियसली, डोनाल्ड ट्रंप आ रहा था, रुपी वीक हो रहा था, एंड the previous RBI governor was a bit more orthodox towards the end of his tenure in this particular manner. आपने मॉनेटरी भी टाइट कर दिया, फिजिकल और मॉनेटरी टाइट किया, तो आफ्टर अ लैग योर नॉमिनल जीडीपी केम डाउन टू 8%. उसी का सब प्रॉब्लम चल रहा है ना. दैट इज द पॉइंट, इज योर रियल जीडीपी इज 7, योर डिफ्लेटर इज 1 and your nominal GDP is 8. We'll get the real numbers soon, but broadly there is no reason to doubt these numbers because same numbers inflation एक साल पहले 6% दिखा रहा था. तब तो opposition या जो skeptics है तब doubt नहीं कर रहे थे, right? So my only point is, please do fiscal consolidation, but do not disconnect it from monetary consolidation or monetary hawkishness. I am perfectly fine with fiscal consolidation, but if you're going to have a 4% inflation target without a real rate framework, without sensible interest rates on an inflation adjusted basis, then doing both simultaneously to win a pat on the back from some rating agency sitting in New York is not constructive for our own economy. And the funny thing here is, the tragicomic thing is, generally politicians have to be told, bhai tu itna spend mat kar. In this case, the politicians, at least in their intention, are genuinely so sincere that we have to tell them, no, you must spend more, not for political reasons but for economic reasons. See, in most cases you have to stop politicians from spending. I must say 2019 also was the case. They were very, very conservative. They won. 2024 they were very conservative, they won, but this time they lost the majority. There are so many state elections on the anvil. I'm not saying ki some freebies, quote unquote, will not be announced, but this budget was as responsible as it gets. So if the RBI follows through, kudos. If the RBI does not follow through, then at some point sincerity starts looking like naivete. That's my point.
Okay, Ajay, Gautam Chikarmane had tweeted this. The GST numbers are intriguing. Revised estimates for 2025-26 show that GST receipts fell by 11%. Budget estimates for 26-27 GST stands at rupees 10,19,020 crore, down rupees 27,450 crore or 2.6%. Share of GST to budget 2026 is estimated at 15%, down from 18%. Not good. What are your thoughts on this?
So I see it is tax budgets for these many years I've seen. I don't think they would ever be scientifically you can arrive at what your tax collection would be, particularly your indirect tax collection. They sort of work on, if you asked, last time when the cut happened, the GST cut and the rate rationalization happened, the workings that they had done as to what the revenue loss will be was very interesting. Because they said we are taking 1 year's earlier consumption pattern, and based on that we are looking at the rates and then we are estimating what the drop will be, and that's how they do that. And if you actually ask, their direct tax collections will be, we just estimate a 10% increase, a 15% increase. I don't think there is any real deep basis for calculating. Today, if you take other things, expenditure budget, or you take disinvestment, etc., or your RBI dividend, they will say, broadly, this is what we are expecting from PSBs, this is what we are expecting from OMCs, this is what we are expecting from RBI. Some number will be there. Today, you ask them for GST, they will not, which is why your revised budget estimates and the difference vary a lot. So I wouldn't really go too much with what that collection would be, because when this whole GST change happened, they were actually expecting a drop. We have not had a drop in any month. Now, that could be because the base is increasing. That could be because your estimate of what your drop was not really that accurate. We don't today have that kind of data collection, which has only started after GST. Otherwise, we don't know what the actual consumption pattern is. So what they would have estimated as the next year's revenue, I think, is more of a, it's not like a guidance that a company gives based on order book, projects, etc. It is just broadly, this is the growth I'm expecting, this is the pattern, this is what the consumption will be, therefore this has to be the GST collection. Now, you will have multiple other aspects to it. I think the way I look at it, and this is what I was commenting even on GST, rather than doing monthly calculation, I always used to see year to date. Similarly, I think we need to see 3-4 months of next year where we'll be on GST and then adjust some of these calculations rather than go by what the budget estimate you put for the next year is. I'll tell you the other reason. The FM in the speech in the very first paragraph said that the government led by Prime Minister Modi has decisively and consistently chosen, and I'm reading it, action over ambivalence, reform over rhetoric, and people over populism. And this comes to the point that Harsh was also making on, you're consolidating fiscally, but your people over populism is what is leading to taking those long-term policies rather than short-term people-pleasing measures. You could have done a capital gains thing. You need not have increased STT. As in these numbers, what 15,000 crores will matter? It would have been rounding somewhere. The
15,000
STT
crore
increase
also
is being
assumes the same volume. That assumes
correct.
the
Same volume. If it is a drop, then it reduces even further. And therefore, even if it is 15, even if it doubles 20-30,000 crores in our size today, doesn't matter. Therefore, that's again another classic people over populism decision. Similar thing. Therefore, on tax, we don't know where we will be unless we take stock as we move along, which I think, they've been doing very well because big changes are happening mid-year. It has nothing to do with the last year. They have done this even year before. The big corporate tax change that happened just before COVID, and we got very unlucky that COVID hit us. Otherwise, the new manufacturing rate they got for 15% was a mid-year change, not a budget. It happened through an ordinance in 2019 October. There was a tax amendment act passed. So you did a big tax reform between two budgets because you saw the need at that point. Therefore, I think if there is a need to course correct, they'll be open to it. They'll not wait for the next budget.
Tushar, someone has asked, do you think it was a national security, defense, and manufacturing budget that which has its first, second, or third order gains in transforming us into a innovation hub?
This is a very good question, and thank you to whoever asked, because my grudge on the budget day was that no one was picking up the question of rare earth corridors. People do not realize that if we think that we have barely begun a manufacturing journey, say 5 or 7, 8 years ago, we are actually nowhere in this business of rare earths and rare minerals. We are literally nowhere. Matlab, the last good news I heard was there were lithium deposits in Jammu. And lithium isn't amongst the rare, it's amongst the critical minerals, right? Which goes into lithium ion batteries and stuff. But we are literally nowhere. We are not even at point zero. We are probably in negative right now. Because in India, if you start looking at mining certain rare earths, you'll have the NGT and all the NGOs breathing down your neck, ki bhai kaise kar rahe ho, kya kar rahe ho? And then there'll be a PIL and the Supreme Court will get interested, and suddenly you realize that your entire supply chain is dependent on that one justice who doesn't even understand what's unfolding globally. So the first thing we need to understand is all our defense manufacturing, all our supply chains, which is a national security concern, they require rare earths. They will require rare minerals in the future, if not 5 years from now, 10 years from now. At this point, and I hate to say this, and it was even in my newsletter today, a country like Democratic Republic of Congo has more bargaining power than us because it has its cobalt reserves, which it uses to toggle between US and China. We cannot do that. All we have as a bargaining power is a market size. So at some point we have to start getting serious. If there are minerals, if there are states that we can start exploring, we have to get into that. Because these elements, they go into practically everything we build. The drones we are going to build tomorrow, the defense equipment we are going to build tomorrow, every single thing will require that. And China shows us that it can weaponize its rare earths. What happened a couple of weeks ago was Reliance's was going for a tie-up with one of the Chinese company for battery cells, and they backed out at last minute because they said this is critical technology. We're not willing to share it with you. Now, what happens? We are saying let's shift to EVs, let's cut our dependency on oil, but you don't want to end up in a situation where you cut your dependency from the Middle East only to increase your imports from China. You don't want to go from Middle East to Middle Kingdom in terms of your energy and your automobile industry. And that is where my worry is, that tomorrow we are getting people to manufacture here, we are getting Apple and everyone to manufacture here. But at some point, we also have to get into the the core of manufacturing, which is why this budget also took care of it. Now these things are not going to happen overnight. Please understand, this is not something that you wave a magic wand and suddenly one day you have discovered the reserve, second day your mining has begun, third day you have figured out how to process it. It doesn't really work that way. This will take time, but I am just glad that the government is moving in that direction. But if you go to it, go back 20 years, our mindset would have been कि ये सब क्या है, हमें तो पढ़ना ही नहीं है इन चक्करों में, this is beyond us. Right. But at this point, all the big economies, and we are the third largest economy in the making, and yet we really did not have a plan for rare earths and rare minerals, but we need to have a plan in motion. And I hope this is the start of it. Again, I'm not saying this will give us results in the first year or even in the first 2, 3 years. But even if we can start finding a way to mine one of the elements, one of the resources, I think it's great if we can do it in 5 years. So yes, to answer that question, this is taking the innovation and the national security part and the defense manufacturing part into equation.
Kushal, on the innovation part, just to add to the brilliant answer Tushar has given, and of course, rare earth in India, the mining, and then of course, the main thing is the refining. See, the government again, not on the budget day, but a couple of months earlier, launched, I believe, the Research Development Innovation Fund, right? The 1 trillion rupees, 1 lakh crores, a fund of funds. So basically, the government will seed that amount of money through venture equity, venture long-term debt, low interest, and then a bunch of second-line fund managers who run their own VCPE funds would invest a part of their funds in critical technology. So it will also have a multiplier effect. You will put in 1 trillion rupees, but they'll also have other LPs, other limited partners, these second-line fund managers, and therefore the total amount invested in deep tech or deep tech kind of applied technologies in India would be significantly more than 1 trillion. 1 trillion rupees is around $11 billion, right? So this, I'm telling you, is not easy for the Indian state apparatus to do. This for the Indian bureaucracy to sanction an X amount, ki you are going to invest in something which a large number of those end investments will not work.
Yeah.
It's not easy, because you remember when Arun Shori had privatized a couple of hotels in Delhi, these ITDC hotels in under Vajpayee's term. Oh, 10 saal baad some journalist in Outlook wrote a piece that apparently, I mean, just complete nonsense. There were kickbacks, etc. Koi court case ho gaya. So to take any such decision in the Indian system, it's very easy for us as outsiders to say, ye kar lo, wo kar lo, ye kar lo, but the system ka ek process hota hai. So this
Mhm.
happened, for example, right? That will set the ball rolling on innovation. General Raj Shukla has been talking about the civil military fusion. See, all key strategic technologies have dual use. If you do well in space, you automatically do well in ICBMs. If you do well in nuclear fission and fusion, civilian power, you do well in nuclear bombs also, and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. I mean, the internet was invented thanks to DARPA, and all of that came from the various defense and space budgets of the US during the Cold War, GPS, etc. So the idea that we are already doing defense indigenization, which is building on 10 years of gradual efforts by the Modi government under various defense ministers. We have a negative list of imports. Our exports of defense products have gone up dramatically, although of a very small base. Now, because now when you put in new money and when you put in new capex and new R&D, that has a civilian spillover into our domestic ecosystem, and where we've done reforms in terms of spatial mapping permissions, in terms of the space ecosystem. So a lot of steps have been taken. The budget, of course, was one part of it. Tushar talked about rare earths. You also had data centers getting a tax incentive till 2047. We can discuss about the fact about autonomy here and there, but agar aap use kar rahe ho US big tech ko, so might as well at least have the data centers in India. Might as well to enforce data localization also you'll need data
Yeah.
centers, no? So then there, these are very large investments. They in turn instigate good investments in nuclear energy, in renewable energy, and so on and so forth. So the government also wants gross FDI to further rise and net FDI to start becoming significantly positive. So the innovation system, this budget was another solid step forward. But a lot of the work was again happened before the budget and after the budget. And RDI of that 1 trillion rupees is genuinely, I think, an underappreciated example right now, because abhi we start हुआ है.
And we are
Okay,
also
Harsh, there
going
was
for
a
yeah.
नहीं go ahead. Go नहीं बोल तुषार बोल sorry.
No, we are also going for construction and infrastructure equipment manufacturing. We are also going for,
Yeah.
some sort of self-reliance in that sector
Including
also.
TBMs, by the way, including TBMs.
Huh. Including the whole tunnel
Actually, I
boring
was surprised
machine.
that she mentioned specific mention of tunnel boring machines
Yes.
in the speech.
Because it is the Chinese
No,
context. It's a
Correct.
Chinese context.
Correct.
we look, we talk about being the third largest economy. We talk about getting manufacturing in India, and we have, by the way, a $280 billion merchandise deficit with the world, as per the number in the economics of, I think, 270 or 280 billion for FY25. Look, a country like Netherlands has more farm exports than us. It's something we need to think about. A country the size of Netherlands. America, why do we fear their, entry into a farm and dairy sector? Not because their stuff is bad or what they'll export to us would be of inferior quality. It's because we can't keep up, because we have too many people invested in agriculture, which is wrong. It's our weakness, that we are fighting in terms of agriculture, in terms of how we are evolving as an economy. So a lot of these things have to be fixed. Now, coming to the resources part, you look at the kind of narratives that were going around. I don't know if anyone in the mainstream media followed it, but a couple of months back, there was actually a whole campaign on Instagram against data centers in India, that somehow they are not environmental friendly, they're going to consume a lot of water, they are going to consume a lot of electricity, it will be at the cost of some tribal population somewhere, all this sort of nonsense. Now, the problem is, how do you reason with these people that this is also about data localization? कल को कोई कंपनी आती है, बोलते फाइन, यू गिवन अस अ टैक्स ब्रेक, वी वांट टू सेट अप अ प्लांट, 100 people sit on a protest, a couple of people politicize it in Noida studios, and you're done. The kind of political stability we need, the kind of policy stability we need. And policy stability, because the state governments are also going to be stakeholders. Tomorrow you start mining, and suddenly somewhere some Instagram influencer will shoot a reel that this is how 10 people in a tribal area are suffering because they were displaced from their shanties to a proper home. And no, this is a very bad Senti story. So this, whatever was announced in this budget, it's so futuristic that I'm also factoring in the resistance it will get on the ground.
And
It
Tushar,
is so futuristic. Yeah.
the state government is a very important point because electricity is a state subject.
Yes.
So therefore,
Achha,
data centers needing power, that becomes an extremely important point. Sorry, you were completing that.
No, I had a question for all of you. Like, somebody has said, what do you think about the government going back on its words in regards to sovereign gold bonds? Today, the HGB price is even below the spot price. Is this not cheating the public?
I have very strong views about it, and I've got trolled enough, so there's no downside. I'll go with it again. See, SGB came with a particular purpose, okay, and I don't think anybody expected gold to go where it has gone. And please remember, it's one of the most expensive borrowing for the government today. It's a small number, but goes back to the point Harsh was making beginning: cost of capital versus cost of funds, all of that. This is one of the most expensive borrowing. When it came in, I don't think anybody envisaged it to be like an open-ended product that you could buy and sell and make money tax-free. It was expected that you would invest. There was a 2.5% plus whatever you would get. Gold was going at 6-8%, whatever annually. You would get that. So everybody was expected to hold it for 5 years and then exit at maturity. So they said it's a tax-free thing. You come in. Now, what happened was people started selling it. And when you buy and sell, the sale was always taxable. There was no doubt about it. The only thing was people who bought it in the open market, if you held it till maturity, you would get an exemption. Now, what also happened in between was because of the gold price, RBI started prematurely maturing these bonds. So when you prematurely matured it, it became tax-free. So I don't think either of it was planned when they started it. And today, what have they done, according to me, is they are telling we never intended that you buy it and sell it and then you make a profit which is tax-free. If you bought it, hold it till maturity, I will make it tax-free. They have not gone back on that bit. Have they gone back on the trading? Yes, but that's the intent. Now, getting very technical, there's something called promissory estoppel, which is if a government gives a promise, they have to keep it. Now, what is the value of promissory estoppel in a tax law? Now, if a government gives a 10-year tax holiday, can they roll it back in the 8th year? Can somebody say, I invested based on your 10-year tax holiday, therefore there's a promissory estoppel? No less than the Supreme Court has said in tax law, promissory estoppel is not a fixed static subject. If there is a public interest that comes in, the government has the powers to take out some of the tax break that they have given you, which is how it is. Now, therefore, are they going back on the word? According to me, that's a word you read. Okay, they had never said you buy and sell, I'll give you the tax break. Now, you were doing it, they were allowing it. Now they are holding it back. Now, also the gold price has gone up. It's gone up. You see over the last 6-8 months, 1 year itself. If you're making that kind of money, you bought it and you are selling it, you bought it and you are redeeming it, they are making it taxable. Is it good? Will it hit those investors who bought it in between? 100%. I go back to the same thing, people over populism, to say that will I take care of a bunch of people who bought it and who are redeeming it, or overall? The way I am looking at it, purely from a, because today the cost of sovereign gold bonds, all four of us are paying, even though we have not bought it. Okay, therefore, the way I am looking at it is the government is clawing back some bit of its cost with a tax on this people who are trading. But people who bought it with long term and holding till maturity, it is still tax free. There's no doubt at all about it.
So then what's the problem?
The problem is there will be people who have bought it in the last whatever few months.
अभी लिया बाद में बेचा.
तो नहीं, you mature it, you hold it till maturity, or RBI does premature redemption, it becomes taxable. So it is impacting those set of people who are telling this is a problem. That's the way I look at it.
Basically, you know what I feel at times, and correct me guys if I'm wrong, like government's mindset is short term I will suck everyone's blood, long term is fine. That's how every time I listen to you guys talk about these things, my brain only gets this. Short termism, government always looks at places to grab money from everywhere. Like
Ajay, you are
tedious
saying
rules
that
in this
somebody
country are
buys it in
ridiculous.
Ajay, you're saying somebody buys it in secondary market but holds it to maturity, they will still pay tax.
They'll pay tax on that now. Now, earlier they were not paying. If you bought and sold, you were always paying
I think
tax.
legally you are right. I think if you're selling before maturity, then to tax. But if you buy it in the secondary market and hold it to maturity, I can see why people feel. I can see. I'm not saying.
That's the only thing. I'm not
feels a
telling
bit
that they are
too
not
clever by.
justified
It feels a
in.
bit too clever by half. Okay, fine.
So I'm not telling they're not justified in.
Then I'm saying gold prices has gone up. It's not the government's fault, but it's not the fault of the person who's bought it also. No?
I agree with you. Now, Harsh, on a complete side note, in jest, if this was done by a corporate, the treasury manager or the person who came up with this product would have been shown the door by now.
Of course.
You see, how could you do a naked product like this without gold, without anything, and gold goes up from 3,000 rupees to 15,000, 16,000 rupees today? But that's where it is. And end of the day, on some of these, whether you like it or not, government has powers to do some things which you can't.
It is what it is. I think your explanation of promissory estoppel was very spot on.
So, see, on this podcast, I would like to announce that जो भी मुझे 1 kg गोल्ड गिफ्ट करना चाहता है मैं अभी भी ले लूंगा.
नहीं, किसी के पास आधा kg तो आधा kg मेरे को दे दो.
आधा 100 ग्राम भी ले लेंगे हम.